This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Michael Sandler, Halifax, Nova Scotia, Canada. 2008. David by H.P. I'm writing this under an appreciable mental strain since it's not a show. Penniless, loneliness, and lack of knowledge alone makes life intolerable. I can bear the torture no longer. I shall cast myself from this garret window into the squalid street below. Do not think, from my slavery to morphine, that I am a weakling or a cad. When you have read these hastily scrawled pages, you may guess, and never fully realize, why it is that I must have forgetfulness or death. It was in one of the most open and least frequented parts of the broad Pacific that the packet of which I was to supercargo fell a victim to the German sea raider. The Great War was then at its very beginning, and the ocean forces of the Hun had not completely sunk to their later degradation, so that our vessel was made a legitimate prize, whilst we were treated with all the fairness and consideration due us as naval prisoners. So liberal, indeed, was the discipline of our captors that 5 days after we were taken, I managed to escape alone in a small boat with water and provisions for a good length of time. When I finally found myself adrift and free, I had but little idea.
Bones having a good night.
Never a competent navigator, I could only guess vaguely by the sun and stars that I was somewhat south of the equator. Of the longitude I knew nothing, and no island coastline was in sight. The weather kept fair. For uncounted days I drifted aimlessly between the islands, waiting for a passing ship, or to be cast out of uninhabitable land. But neither ship nor land appeared, and I began to despair in my solitude upon the heaving vastness of unbroken blue. The change happened whilst I slept. Its details I shall never know, for my slumber, though troubled and dream-infested, was continuous. When at last I awakened, it was to discover myself half sucked into a slimy expanse of rich black mire, which extended about me in monotonous undulations as far as I could see, and in which my boat lay grounded some distance away. Though one might well imagine that my first sensation would be of wonder at so prodigious and unexpected a transformation of scenery, I was in reality more horrified than astonished. For there was in the air and in the rotting soil a sinister quality.
Hey, Mix, how you doing? Thanks for stopping
The
by.
region was putrid with the carcasses of decaying fish.
How's your night going?
Less describable things which I saw protruding from the nasty mud of the unending plain. Perhaps I should not hope to convey in mere words the unutterable hideousness that can dwell in absolute silence and barren immensity. There was nothing and nothing in sight save a vast reach of black slime. Yet the very completeness of the stillness and the homogeneity of the landscape impressed me with a nauseating fear. The sun was blazing down from a sky which seemed to me almost black in its cloudless cruelty, as though reflecting the inky marsh beneath my feet. As I crawled into the stranded boat,
Oh, yeah.
I realized that only one theory could explain my
Not much. Just smoking a bowl,
unprecedented volcanic upheaval
listening to
of the ocean floor,
some
which
H.P.
had grown to the
Lovecraft,
surface, exposing regions
and deciding what
which
game I want to
millions
play.
of years had lain hidden under
My brother is at work tonight, so he won't be
so
back
great
till
was the extent of the new land
around 2 or so.
beneath me, that I could not detect the faintest noise of the surging ocean, strain my ears as I might, nor were there any seafowl to prey upon the dead things. For several hours I sat thinking or brooding in the boat, which lay upon its side and afforded a slight shade as the sun moved across the heavens. As the day progressed, the ground lost some of its stickiness and seemed likely to dry sufficiently for traveling purposes in a short time. That night I slept but little, and the next day I made for myself a pack containing food and water preparatory to an overland journey in search of the vanished sea and possible rescue. On the third morning I found the soil dry enough to walk upon with ease. The odor of the fish was maddening, but I was too much concerned with graver things to mind so slight an evil. set out boldly for an unknown goal. All day I forged steadily westward, guided by a faraway hummock which rose higher than any other elevation on the rolling desert. That night I encamped, and on the following day still traveled toward the hummock, though that object seemed
What, you wanna go say?
than when I had first espied it. By the fourth evening I attained the base of the mound, which turned out to be much higher than it had appeared from a distance, an intervening valley setting it out in sharper relief from the general surface.
Be right back, everyone.
Too weary to ascend, I slept in the shadow of the hill. I know not why my dreams were so wild that night, but ere the waning and fantastically gibbous moon that had risen far above the eastern plain, I was awake in a cold perspiration, determined to sleep no more. Such visions as I had experienced were too much for me to endure again, and in the glow of the moon I saw how unwise I had been to travel by day. Without the glare of the parching sun, my journey would have cost me less energy. Indeed, I now felt quite able to perform the ascent which had deterred me at sunset. Picking up my pack, I started for the crest of the eminence. I have said that the unbroken monotony of the rolling plain was a source of vague horror to me, but I think my horror was greater when I gained the summit of the mound and looked down the other side into an immeasurable pit or canyon, whose black recesses the moon had not yet soared high enough to illuminate. I felt myself on the edge of the world, peering over the rim into a fathomless chaos of eternal night. Through my terror ran curious reminiscences of Paradise Lost and Satan's hideous climb through the unfashioned realms of darkness. As the moon climbed higher in the sky, I began to see that the slopes of the valley were not so perpendicular as I had imagined. Ledges and outcroppings of rock afforded fairly easy footholds for a descent, whilst after a drop of a few hundred feet, the declivity became very gradual. Urged on by an impulse which I cannot definitely analyze, I scrambled with some difficulty down the rocks and stood on a gentler slope beneath, gazing into the Stygian deeps where no light had yet penetrated. All at once, my attention was captured by a vast and singular object on the opposite slope, which rose steeply about 100 yards ahead of me, an object which gleamed whitely in the newly bestowed rays of the ascending moon. That it was merely a gigantic piece of stone, I soon assured myself, but I was conscious of a distant impression that its contour and position were not altogether the work of nature. A closer scrutiny filled me with sensations I cannot express, for despite its enormous magnitude and its position in an abyss which had yawned at the bottom of the sea since the world was young, I perceived beyond a doubt that the strange object was a well-shaped monolith, whose massive bulk had known the workmanship and perhaps the worship of living and thinking creatures. Dazed and frightened, yet not without a certain thrill of the scientist's or archaeologist's delight, I examined my surroundings more closely. The moon, now near the zenith, shone weirdly and vividly above the towering steeps that hemmed in the chasm, and revealed the fact that a far-flung body of water flowed at the bottom, winding out of sight in both directions and almost lapping my feet as I stood on the slope. Across the chasm, the wavelets washed the base of the Cyclopean monolith, on whose surface I could now trace both inscriptions and crude sculptures. The writing was in a system of hieroglyphics unknown to me, and unlike anything I had ever seen in books, consisting for the most part of conventionalized aquatic symbols such as fishes, eels, octopi, crustaceans, mollusks, whales, and the like. Several characters obviously represented marine things which are unknown to the modern world, but whose decomposing forms I had observed on the ocean-risen plain. It was the pictorial carving, however, that did most to hold me spellbound. Plainly visible across the intervening water, on account of their enormous size, was an array of bas-reliefs whose subject would have excited the envy of a Dor. I think that these things were supposed to depict men, at least a certain sort of men, The creatures were shown disporting like fishes in the waters of some marine grotto, or paying homage at some monolithic shrine, which came to be under the waves as well. Of their faces and forms I dare not speak in detail, for the mere remembrance makes me faint. Grotesque beyond the imagination of a Poe or a Bulwer, they were damnably human in the general outline, despite webbed hands and feet, shockingly wide and flabby lips, glassy, bulging eyes, and other features less pleasant to recall. Curiously enough, they seemed to have been chiseled badly in proportion with their scenic background, for one of the creatures was shown in the act of killing a whale, represented as but little larger than himself. I remarked, as I say, their grotesqueness and strange size. But in a moment,
What's everyone got planned for the weekend?
Imaginary gods of some primitive fishing or seafaring tribe, some tribe whose last descendant had perished eras before the first ancestor of the Piltdown or Neanderthal man was born. Awestruck at this unexpected glimpse into a past beyond the conception of the most daring anthropologist, I stood musing whilst the moon cast queer reflections on the silent channel before me. Then suddenly I saw it. With only a slight churning to mark its rise to the surface, the thing slid into view above the dark waters. Vast, Polyphemus-like, and loathsome, it darted like a stupendous monster of nightmares to the monolith, about which it flung its gigantic scaly arms, the while it bowed its hideous head and gave vent to certain measured sounds. I think I went mad then. Of my frantic ascent of the slope and cliff, and of my delirious journey back to the stranded boat, I remember little. I believe I sang a great deal, and laughed oddly when I was unable to sing. I have indistinct recollections of a great storm, sometime after I reached the boat. At any rate, I knew that I heard peals of thunder and other tones which nature utters only in her wildest moods. When I came out of the shadows, I was in the San Francisco hospital, brought thither by the captain of the American ship which had picked up my boat in mid-ocean. In my delirium I had said much, but found that my words had been given scant attention. Of any land upheaval in the Pacific, my rescuers knew nothing, nor did I deem it necessary to insist upon a thing which I knew they could not believe. Once I sought out a celebrated ethnologist, and amused him with peculiar questions regarding the ancient Philistine legend of Dagon, the fish god, but soon perceiving that he was hopelessly professional, I did not press my inquiries. It is at night, especially when the moon is gibbous and waning, that I see the thing. I tried morphine, but the drug has given only transient surcease, and has drawn me to its clutches as a hopeless slave. So now I am to end it all, having written a full account for the information of the contemptuous amusement of my fellow men. Often I ask myself if it could not all have been pure phantasm, a mere freak of fever as I lay sun-stricken and raving in the open boat after my escape from the German man-of-war. This I ask myself, but ever does there come before me a hideously vivid vision in reply. I cannot think of the deep sea without shuddering at the nameless things that may at this very moment be crawling and floundering on its slimy bed, worshipping their ancient stone idols and carving their own detestable likenesses on submarine obelisks and water-soaked granite. I dream of a day when they may rise above the billows to drag down in their reeking talons the remnants of a puny war exhausted mankind, the day when the land shall sink and the dark ocean floor shall ascend amidst universal pandemonium. The end is near. I hear a noise at the door, as of some immense, slippery body lumbering against it. It shall not find me. God, that hand! The window! The window! End of Dagon. This has been a recording by Michael Sample, Halifax, Nova Scotia, Canada, 2008.
This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain.
Hey, Weedware, how you doing? Thanks for stopping by. How's your Friday night going?
This is a LibriVox
There we
recording.
go.
All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org.
Hope you're doing good, Weedware.
The Divine Comedy.
Hope everyone's doing good tonight and staying safe out there.
Translated by Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. Inferno, Canto 1. Midway upon the journey of our life, I found myself within a forest dark, for the straightforward pathway had been lost. Ah me, how hard a thing it is to say, what was this forest, savage, rough, and stern, which in the very thought renews the fear. So bitter is it, death is little more. But of the good to treat, which there I found, speak will I of the other things I saw there. I cannot well repeat how there I entered. So full was I of slumber at the
You know
moment
what?
in which I had abandoned
Let me
the truth.
change this one. Let me go back with some more H.P. Lovecraft. Hey, Carmel Pop, how you doing? I'm listening to some H.P. Lovecraft since it falls under the public domain. How are you doing today?
This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Keith Worrell. The Alchemist by H.P. Lovecraft.
Hell yeah, come pop.
Scouring the grassy summit of a swelling mount.
It's always good
near the base with the
when we had a long day and we finally get home.
For centuries, its lofty battlements have frowned down upon the wild and rugged countryside about, serving as a home and stronghold for the proud houses whose honored line is older even than moss-grown castle walls. These ancient turrets, stained by the storms of generations and crumbling under the slow yet mighty pressure of time, formed in the ages of feudalism one of the most dreaded and formidable fortresses in all France. From its mocky collated parapets, mounted battles of barons, counts, and even kings, yet never had the spacious hall resounded to the invader. But since those glorious years, all has changed. A poverty but little above the level of dire want,
which doggy?
a pride of name that
The little black one?
pursued commercial life, prevented the silence of our line from maintaining their estates in pristine splendor. And a falling stone in the walls, the overgrown vegetation of the parks, the dry and dusty moat, the ill-paved courtyards, and top
Oh, that's
as well as the sagging floors.
That's Ouija Bud's dog. When we have her over here, we usually dog sitting for her while she's at work. But she's off today, so we don't get to take care of her today.
It was in one of the vast and gloomy chambers of this remaining tower that I, Antone, last of the unhappy and accursed counts of the sea, first saw the light of day 90 long years ago. Within these walls and amongst the dark and shadowy forests, the wild ravines and grottos of the hillside below, were spent the first years of my troubled life. My parents I never knew. My father had been killed at the age of 32, a month before I was born, by the fall of a stone somehow dislodged from one of the deserted parapets of the castle. And my mother having died at my birth, my care and education devolved solely upon one remaining servitor, an old and trusted man of considerable intelligence, whose name I remember as Pierre. I was an only child, and the lack of companionship which this fact entailed upon me was augmented by the strange care exercised by my aged guardian in excluding me from society. Of the peasant children clothes were scattered
I'm
here
smoking on
well,
my vape I was hitting, that's some blueberry kush. And other than that, I'm smoking on some roach weed.
Its real object was to keep from my ears the idle tales of the dread curse upon our line that were nightly told and magnified by the simple tenantry as they conversed in their hushed accents in the glow of their cottage hearths. Thus isolated and thrown upon my own resources, I spent the hours of my childhood in poring over the ancient tombs that filled the shadow-haunted library of the chateau, and in roaming without aim or purpose through the perpetual dust of the spectral wood that clothed the side of the hill near its foot. It was perhaps an effect of such surroundings that my mind early acquired a shade of melancholy. Those studies and pursuit which partake of the dark and occult in nature most strongly claimed my attention. Of my own race I was permitted to learn singularly little, yet what small knowledge of it I was able to gain seemed to depress me much. Perhaps it was at first only the manifest reluctance of my old preceptor to discuss with me my paternal ancestry that gave rise to the terror which I ever felt at the mention of my great house. Yet as I grew out of childhood, I was able to piece together disconnected fragments of discourse, let it slip from the unwilling tongue which had begun to falter in approaching senility, and had a sort of relation to a certain circumstance which I had always deemed strange, but which now became dimly terrible. The circumstances to which I allude is the early age at which all the counts of my line had met their end. Whilst I had hitherto considered this but a natural tribute of a family of short-lived men, I afterwards pondered long upon the premature deaths, and began to connect them with the wanderings of the old man, who often spoke of a curse which for centuries had prevented the lives of the holders of my title from much exceeding the span of 32 years. Upon my 21st birthday, the aged Pierre gave to me a family document which he said had for many generations been handed down from father to son and continued by each possessor. Its contents were of the most startling nature, and its perusal confirmed the gravest of my apprehension. At this time, my belief in the supernatural was firm and deep-seated, else I would have dismissed with scorn the incredible narrative unfolded before my eyes. The paper carried me back to the days of the 13th century, when the old castle in which I sat had been a feared and impregnable fortress. It told of a certain ancient man who had once dwelled on our estates, a person of no small accomplishments, though little above the rank of peasant. By name, Michael, usually designated by his surname of Malvase, the evil, on account of his sinister reputation. He had studied beyond the custom of his kind, seeking such things as the philosopher's stone or the elixir of eternal life, and was reputed wise in the terrible secrets of black magic and alchemy. Michael Malvase had one son named Charles, a youth as proficient as himself in the hidden arts, who had therefore become called the sorcerer, or the wizard. This pair, shunned by all
What are you
honest
smoking on
folk,
tonight, caramel pop?
Old Michael was said to have burnt his wife alive as a sacrifice to the devil, and the unaccountable disappearance of many small peasant children was laid at the dreaded door of these two. Yet through the dark natures of the father and son ran one seemingly ray of humanity. The old man loved his offspring with fierce intensity, whilst the youth had for his parent a more than filial affection. One night, the castle on the hill was thrown into the wild confusion by the banishment of a young Godfrey, son to Henry, the Count. A searching party, headed by the frantic father, invaded the cottage of the sorcerers, and there came upon old Michael Malvase, busy over a huge and violently bubbling cauldron. Without certain cause, in the ungoverned madness of fury and despair, the Count laid hands on the aged wizard, and ere he was told, his victim was no more. Meanwhile, joyful servant was claiming the finding of young Godfrey in a distant and unused chamber of the great edifice, telling too late that poor Michael had been killed in vain. As the Count and his associates turned away from the lovely abode of the alchemist, the form of Charles the sorcerer appeared through the trees. The excited chatter of menials standing about told him what had occurred, yet he seemed at first unmoved at his father's fate. Then, slowly advancing to meet the Count, he pronounced in dull yet terrible accents the curse that ever afterward haunted the house of C. May never a noble of thy murderous line survive to reach a greater age than thine, spoke he, when suddenly leaping backwards into the black woods, he drew from his tunic a vial of colorless liquid, which he threw into the bases of his father's slayer as he disappeared behind the inky curtain of the night. The Count died without utterance and was buried the next day, but little more than 32 years from the hour of his birth. No trace of the assassin could be found, though relentless bands of peasants scoured the neighboring woods and the meadowland around the hill. Thus time and the want of a remainder dulled the memory of the curse in the minds of the late Count's family, so that when Godfrey, innocent cause of the whole tragedy, and now bearing the title, was killed by an arrow whilst hunting at the age of 32, there were no thoughts save those of grief at his demise. But when, years afterwards, the next young Count, Robert by name, was found dead in a nearby field of no apparent cause, the peasants told in whispers that their son Pierre had but lately passed his 32nd birthday when surprised by early death. Louis, son of Robert, was found drowned in the moat in the same fateful age, and thus down through the centuries ran the ominous chronicle of Henry, Robert, Antonius, and Armand, snatched from happy and virtuous lives when little below the age of their unfortunate ancestor at his murder. That I had left at most but 11 years further existence was made certain to me by the words which I had read. My life previously held at small value now became dearer to me each day, as I delved deeper and deeper into the mysteries of the hidden world of black magic. Isolated as I was, modern science had produced no impression upon me, and I labored, as in the Middle Ages, as rapt as had been old Michael and young Charles themselves in the acquisition of demonological and alchemical learning. Yet read as I might, in no manner could I account for the strange curse upon my line. In unusually rational moments, I would even go so far as to seek a natural explanation, attributing the early deaths of my ancestors to the sinister Charles Le Sorcier and his heirs. Yet, having found upon careful inquiry that there were no known descendants of the alchemist, I would fall back to occult studies, and once more endeavor to find a spell that would release my house from its terrible burden. Upon one thing I was absolutely resolved. I would never wed, for, since no other branch of my family was in existence,
Oh shit.
I might thus end the curse.
Not sure what it is, huh?
As I drew near the age of 30, old Pierre was called to the land beyond. Alone, I buried him beneath the stones of the courtyard, about which he had loved to wander in life. Thus was I left to ponder on myself as the only human great fortress, and in my utter solitude, my
And
mind
the only reason I have
protest
these
against the impending doom.
is because my cousin dropped them off to me. 'Cause if not, I'd probably pretty much just have my cartridge and resin hitting this. Because this, I like these because they last a good little while if you don't hit them all the time. And when you're out and you still have one or two of these definitely help out.
My exact age, even down to days and hours, I kept a most careful record for each of
the car is a green box, but my mod is a Yokan, or better that way. 3 temps, and then if it's the shorter or the other.
With new vigor, I applied myself to my examination of the old chateau and its contents. It was upon one of the longest of all my excursions of discovery.
And that's on, excuse me, and that's on the lowest temp. Yeah, but it has that too.
As the afternoon progressed, I saw the lower levels descending into what appeared to be either a medieval place of confinement or a more recently excavated storehouse for gunpowder.
For your skinnier and fatter carts. And I've had this for a good couple of years, I think.
That a blank, water-stained wall impeded my journey.
Give me 1 second, everyone. I will come take care of them dogs real quick.
Pausing, I succeeded with difficulty in raising it, whereupon there was revealed a black aperture exhaling nauseous fumes, which caused my torch to sputter, and disclosing in the unsteady glare top of a flight of stone steps. As soon as the torch, which I lowered into the repellent depths, burned freely and steadily, I commenced my descent. The steps were many and led to a narrow stone-flagged passage, which I knew must be far underground. This passage proved of great length and terminated in the massive oaken door, dripping with the moisture of the place and stoutly resisting all my attempts to open it. Ceasing after a time my efforts in this direction, I had proceeded back some distance towards the steps, where there suddenly fell to my experience one of the most profound and maddening shocks capable of reception by the human mind. Without warning, I heard the heavy door behind me creak slowly open upon its rusty hinges. My immediate sensations were incapable of analysis.
Hey, Panda Cat, how you doing? Hey, rested. Let me show you guys something. This is how blind I am, everyone. This is how close I have to sit to the TV to be able to see it.
It was that of a man, clad in a skull cap and long medieval tunic.
Pretty much that close.
His long hair and flowing beard were of a terrible and intense black hue and incredible fusion. His forehead high beyond the usual dimensions, his cheeks deep sunken and heavily lined with wrinkles.
Hope everyone's doing good today.
Such a deadly, marble-like whiteness as I have never elsewhere seen in man. His figure.
I gotta pretty much reach and touch my TV, because I gotta sit that close to be able to see it.
But strangest of all were his eyes, twin caves of abysmal blackness, profound in expression of understanding, yet inhuman in degree of wickedness. These were now fixed upon me, piercing my soul with their hatred, and rooting me to the spot whereon I stood. At last the figure spoke in a rumbling voice.
How's everyone's night going so far?
All hollowness and latent malevolence. The language in which the discourse was clothed was that debased form of Latin in use amongst the more learned men of the Middle Ages, and made familiar to me by my prolonged researches into the works of the old alchemists and demonologists. The apparition spoke of the curse which had hovered over my house, told me of the coming end, dwelt on the wrong perpetuated by my ancestor against old Michael Malveus, and gloated over the revenge of Charles Le Saucier. He told me how young Charles had escaped into the night, returning in after years to kill Godfrey, the heir, with an arrow just as he approached the age which had been his father's at his assassination. How he had secretly returned to the estate and established himself unknown in the even then deserted subterranean chamber whose doorway now framed the hideous narrator. How he had seized Robert, son of Godfrey, in a field, forced poison down his throat, and then left him to die at the age of 32, thus maintaining the foul provisions of his vengeful curse. At this point, I was left to imagine the solution of the greatest mystery of all. How the curse had been fulfilled since that time when Charles Le Saucier must in the course of nature have died, for the man digressed into an account of the deep alchemical studies of two wizards, father and son, speaking most particularly of the researches of Charles Le Saucier concerning the elixir which should grant him who partook of it an eternal light and youth. His enthusiasm had seemed for the moment to remove from his terrible eyes the black malevolence that had first so haunted me. But suddenly the fiendish glare returned, and with a shocking sound like the hissing of a serpent, the stranger raised a glass vial with the evident intent of ending my life, as had Charles de Saucier 600 years before ended that of my ancestor. Prompted by some preserving instinct of self-defense, I broke through the spell that had hitherto held me immovable, and flung my now dying torch at the creature who menaced my existence. I heard the vial break harmlessly against the stones of the passage as the tunic of the strange man caught fire and lit the horrid scene with a ghastly radiance. The shriek of fright and impotent malice emanated by the would-be assassin proved too much for my already shaken nerves, and I fell prone upon the slimy floor in a total faint. When at last my senses returned, all was frightfully dark, and my mind, remembering what had occurred, shrank from the idea of beholding any more. Yet curiosity overmastered all. Who, I asked myself, was the man of evil, and how come he within the castle walls? Why should he seek to avenge the death of Michael Malveus, and how had the curse been carried on through all these long centuries since the time of Charles Le Saucier? The dread of years was lifted from my shoulders, for I knew that he whom I had felled was the source of all my danger from the curse, and now I was free. I burned with desire to learn more of the sinister thing which had haunted my line for centuries, and made of my own youth one long continued nightmare. Determined upon further exploration, I felt my pockets for lint and steel, and lit the unused torch which I had with me. First of all, new light revealed the distorted and blackened form of the mysterious stranger. The hideous eyes were now closed. Disliking the sight, I turned away and entered the chamber beyond the Gothic door. Here I found what seemed much like an alchemist's laboratory. In one corner was an immense pile of shining yellow metal that sparkled gorgeously in the light of the torch. It may have been gold, but I did not pause to examine it, for I was strangely affected by that which I had undergone. At the farthest end of the apartment was an opening leading out into one of the many wild ravines of the dark hillside forest. Filled with wonder, yet now realizing how the man had obtained access to the chateau, I proceeded to return. I had intended to pass by the remains of a stranger with a averted face, but as I approached the body, I seemed to hear, emanating from it, a faint sound, as though life were not yet wholly extinct. Aghast, I turned to examine the charred and shriveled figure on the floor. Then,
Oh shit.
horrible eyes,
Hell yeah, Panda Cat.
the seared face in which they were set, opened wide with an expression which I was unable to interpret. The cracked lips.
Well, I mean, I've been
not well understand.
I've been grinding on some Diablo.
And again, I fancied the words ears and curse issued from the twisted mouth. Still, I was at a loss to gather the purport of his disconnected speech.
Because what is it? I think it's season 25. Where so far I've gotten a good amount of some cool shit. Some armor, some weapons.
He found his voice and his dying breath screamed forth those words.
But now I gotta play at a lot higher level.
Can you not guess my secret?
They definitely made
They recognize the will which has through
they made this season pretty
the dreadful curse upon the house.
you get pretty cool shit, but you definitely gotta
how the secret of alchemy was solved.
play on some hard difficulties to get
I have lived for 600
shit in this season compared to some of the other seasons.
End of The Alchemist. Recording by Keith Worrell. Please visit my webpage at www.nakedpenguins.org.
Oh yeah, Carmel Pop, thanks for stopping by.
This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Beast in the Cave, P. Lovecraft. The horrible conclusion which had been gradually intruding itself upon my confused and reluctant mind was now an awful certainty. I was lost, completely hopelessly lost in the vast and labyrinthine recess of the Mammoth Cave. Turn as I might, in no direction could my straining vision seize on any object capable of serving as a guidepost to set me on the outward path. That never more should I behold the blessed light of day, or scan the pleasant hills and dales of the beautiful world outside. My reason could no longer entertain the slightest unbelief. Hope had departed. Yet indoctrinated as I was by a life of philosophical study, I derived no small measure of satisfaction from my unimpassioned demeanor, for although I had frequently read of the wild frenzies into which were thrown the victims of similar situations, I experienced none of these, but stood quiet as soon as I clearly realized the loss of my bearings. Nor did the thought that I had probably wandered beyond the utmost limits of an ordinary search cause me to abandon my composure even for a moment. If I must die, I reflected, then was this terrible yet majestic cavern as welcome a sepulchre as that which any churchyard might afford, a conception which carried with it more of tranquillity than of despair. Starving would prove my ultimate fate, of this I was certain. Some I knew had gone mad under circumstances such as these, but I felt that this end would not be mine. My disaster was the result of no fault save my own, since unknown to the guide I had separated myself from the regular party of sightseers, and wandering for over an hour in the hidden avenues of the cave, had found myself unable to retrace the devious windings which I had pursued.
What are you smoking on today, Panda Cat?
Already my torch had begun to expire. Soon I would be enveloped by the total and almost palpable blackness of the bowels of the earth. As I stood in the waning, unsteady light, I idly wondered over the exact circumstances of my coming end. I remembered the accounts which I had heard of the colony of consumptives who, taking their residence in this gigantic grotto to find help from the apparently salubrious air of the underground world, with its steady, uniform temperature, pure air, and peaceful quiet.
Hell yeah, Panda Cat.
Death in strange and ghastly form. I had seen the sad remains of their ill-made cottages as I passed them by with the party, and had wondered what unnatural influence a long sojourn in this immense and silent cavern would exert upon one as healthy and vigorous as I. Now I grimly told myself my opportunity for settling this point had arrived.
Right now I'm talking on some roaches and a blueberry, I think it's a blueberry OG or blueberry Kush, one of the two.
Leave no stone unturned, no possible means of escape neglected. So summoning all the powers possessed by
But it definitely helps, especially when you run out.
in the vain hope of attracting the attention of the guide by my clamor. Yet as I called, I believed in my heart that my cries reached no one, that my voice, magnified and reflected by the numberless ramparts of the black maze about me, fell upon no ears save my own. All at once, however, my attention was fixed with a start as I fancied that I heard the sound of soft approaching steps on the rocky floor of the cavern. Was my deliverance about to be accomplished so soon? Had then all my horrible apprehensions been for naught? And was the guide, having marked my unwarranted absence from the party, following my course and seeking me out in this limestone labyrinth? Whilst these joyful queries arose in my brain, I was on the point of renewing my cries, in order that my discovery might come the sooner, when in an instant my delight was turned to horror as I listened, for my ever acute ear now sharpened in even greater degree by the complete silence of the cave, bore to my benumbed understanding the unexpected and dreadful knowledge that these footfalls were not like those of any mortal man. In the unearthly stillness of this subterranean region, the tread of the booted guide would have sounded like a series of sharp and incisive blows. These impacts were soft, stealthy, as of the paws of some feline. Besides, when I listened carefully, I seemed to trace the falls of 4 instead of 2 feet. I was now convinced that I had by my own cries aroused and attracted some wild beast, perhaps a mountain lion, which had accidentally strayed within the cave. Perhaps, I considered, the Almighty had chosen for me a swifter and more merciful death than that of hunger. Yet the instinct of self-preservation, never wholly dormant, was stirred in my breast, and though escape from the oncoming peril might but spare me for a sterner and more lingering end, I determined nevertheless not destined for realization, for the strange footfalls steadily advanced, the animal evidently having obtained my scent, which in an atmosphere so absolutely free from all distracting influences as is that of the cave, could doubtless be followed at great distance. Seeing, therefore, that I must be armed for defense against an uncanny and unseen attack in the dark, I grouped about me the largest of the fragments of rock which were strewn upon all parts of the floor of the cavern in the vicinity, and grasping one in each hand for immediate use, awaited with resignation the inevitable result. Meanwhile, the hideous pattering of the paws drew near. Certainly the conduct of the creature was exceedingly strange. Most of the time, tread seemed to be that of a quadruped, walking with a singular lack of unison betwixt hind and fore feet. Yet at brief and infrequent intervals I fancied that but 2 feet were engaged in the process of locomotion. I wondered what species of animal was to confront me. It must, I thought, be some unfortunate beast who had paid for its curiosity to investigate one of the entrances of the fearful grotto, with a lifelong confinement in its interminable recesses. It doubtless obtained as food the eyeless fish, bats, and rats of the cave, as well as some of the ordinary fish that are wafted in at every freshet of the Green River, which communicates in some occult manner with the waters of the cave. I occupied my terrible vigil with grotesque conjectures of what alteration cave life might have wrought in the physical structure of the beast, remembering the awful appearances ascribed by local tradition to the consumptives who had died after long residence in the cave. Then I remembered with a start that, even should I succeed in felling my antagonist, I should never behold its form, as my torch had long since been extinct, and I was entirely unprovided with matches. The tension on my brain now became frightful. My disordered fancy conjured up hideous and fearsome shapes from the sinister darkness that surrounded me, and that actually seemed to press upon my body. Nearer, nearer the dreadful footfalls approached. It seemed that I must give vent to a piercing scream, yet had I been sufficiently irresolute to attempt such a thing, my voice could scarce have responded. I was petrified, rooted to the spot. I doubted if my right arm would allow me to hurl its missile at the oncoming thing, when the crucial moment should arrive. Now the steady pat-pat of the steps was close at hand, now very close. I could hear the labored breathing of the animal. Terror-struck as I was, I realized that it must have come from a considerable distance, and was correspondingly fatigued. Suddenly the spell broke. My right hand, guided by my ever-trustworthy sense of hearing, threw with full force the sharp-angled bit of limestone which it contained, toward that point in the darkness from which emanated the breathing and pattering, and, wonderful to relate, it nearly reached its goal, for I heard the thing jump, landing at a distance away, where it seemed to pause. Having readjusted my aim, I discharged my second missile, this time most effectively, for with a flood of joy I listened as the creature fell in what sounded like a complete collapse, and evidently remained prone and unmoving. Almost overpowered by the great relief which rushed over me, I reeled back against the wall. The breathing continued in heavy gasping inhalations and expirations, whence I realized that I had no more than wounded the creature, and now all desire to examine the thing ceased. At last something alive to groundless, superstitious fear had entered my brain, and I did not approach the body, nor did I continue to cast stones at it in order to complete the extinction of its life. Instead, I ran at full speed in what was, as nearly as I could estimate my frenzied condition, the direction from which I had come. Suddenly I heard a sound, or rather a regular succession of sounds. In another instant they had resolved themselves into a series of sharp metallic clicks. This time there was no doubt. It was the guide. And then I shouted, yelled, screamed, even shrieked with joy, as I beheld in the vaulted arches above the faint and glimmering effulgence which I knew to be the reflected light of an approaching torch. I ran to meet the flare, and before I could completely understand what had occurred, was lying upon the ground at the feet of the guide, embracing his boots and gibbering, despite my boasted reserve, in a most meaningless and idiotic manner, pouring out my terrible story, and at the same time overwhelming my auditor with protestations of gratitude. At length I awoke to something like my normal consciousness. The guide had noted my absence upon the arrival of the party at the entrance of the cave, and had, from his own intuitive sense of direction, proceeded to make a thorough canvass of my passages just ahead of where he had last spoken to me, locating my whereabouts after a quest of about 4 hours. By the time he had related this to me, I, emboldened by his torch and his company, began to reflect upon the strange beast which I had wounded but a short distance back in the darkness, and suggested that we ascertain by the flashlight's aid what manner of creature was my victim. Accordingly, I retraced my steps, unnatural monsters either of us had in our lifetimes beheld, this was in surpassing degree the strangest. It appeared to be an anthropoid ape, large proportions, escaped perhaps from some itinerant menagerie. Its hair was snow white, a thing due no doubt to the bleaching action of a long existence within the inky confines of the cave, but it was also surprisingly thin, being indeed largely absent save on the head, where it was of such length and abundance that it fell over the shoulders in considerable profusion. The face was turned away from us, as the creature lay almost directly upon it. The inclination of the limbs was very singular, explaining, however, the alternation in their use which I had before noted, whereby the beast used sometimes all four, and on other occasions but two, for its progress. From the tips of the fingers or toes, long rat-like claws extended. The hands or feet were not prehensile, a fact that I ascribed to that long residence in the cave, which, as I before mentioned, seemed evident from the all-pervading and almost unearthly whiteness, so characteristic of the whole anatomy. No tail seemed to be present. The respiration had now grown very feeble, and the guide had drawn his pistol with the evident intent of dispatching the creature, when a sudden sound emitted by the latter caused the weapon to fall unused. The sound was of a nature difficult to describe. It was not like the normal note of any known species of simian, and I wonder if this unnatural quality were not the result of a long continued and complete silence, broken by the sensations produced by the advent of the light, a thing which the beast could not have seen since its first entrance into the cave. The sound, which I might feebly attempt to classify as a kind of deep-toned chattering, was faintly continued. All at once, a fleeting spasm of energy seemed to pass through the frame of the beast. The paws went through a convulsive motion, and the limbs contracted. With a jerk, the white body rolled over so that its face was turned in our direction. For a moment I was so struck with horror at the eyes thus revealed that I noted nothing else. They were black, those eyes, deep jetty black, in hideous contrast to the snow-white hair and flesh. Like those of the other cave denizens, they were deeply sunken.
Hey, Stoney, how you doing?
Destitute of iris.
Thanks for stopping
When
by.
I looked more closely, I saw that they were set in a face less prognathous than that of the average ape, and infinitely less hairy. The nose was quite distinct. As we gazed upon the uncanny sight presented to our vision, the thick lips opened and several sounds issued from them, after which the thing relaxed in death. The guide clutched my coat sleeve and trembled so violently that the light shook fitfully, casting weird moving shadows on the wall. I made no motion, but stood rigidly still, my horrified eyes fixed upon the floor ahead. The fear left, and wonder, awe, compassion, and reverence succeeded in its place. For the sounds uttered by the stricken figure that lay stretched out on the limestone had told us the awesome truth. The creature I had killed, the strange beast of the unfathomed cave, was, or had at one time been, a man. End of The Beast in the Cave by H.P. Lovecraft.
This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Beyond the Wall of Sleep by H.P. Lovecraft. I have often wondered if the majority of mankind
Hell yeah, Stoney.
on the occasionally titanic significance of dreams and of the obscure world to which they belong. Whilst the greater number of our nocturnal visions are perhaps no more than faint and fantastic reflections of our waking experiences, Freud, to the contrary, with his puerile symbolism, there are still a certain remainder whose immundane and ethereal character permits of no ordinary interpretation, and whose vaguely exciting and disquieting effect suggests possible minute glimpses into a sphere of mental existence no less important than physical life, yet separated from that life by an all but impassable barrier. From my experience, I cannot doubt but
Hell yeah,
all
Stoney.
are lost to terrestrial consciousness is indeed sojourning in another
Oh shit.
and uncorporeal life of far different nature from the life we know, and of which only the slightest and most indistinct memories From those blurred and fragmentary memories we may infer much, yet prove little. We may guess that in dreams, life, matter, and vitality, as the earth knows such things, are not necessarily constant, and that time and space do not exist as our waking selves comprehend them. Sometimes I believe that this less material life is our truer life, and that our vain presence on the terraqueous globe is itself a secondary or merely virtual phenomenon. It was from a youthful reverie filled with speculations of this sort that I arose one afternoon in the winter of 1900 and 1901, when to the state psychopathic institution in which I served as an intern was brought the man whose case has ever since haunted me so unceasingly. His name, as given on the records, was Joe Slater, or Slater, and his appearance was that of the typical denizen of the Catskill Mountain region, one of those strange, repellent scions of a primitive colonial peasant stock, whose isolation for nearly 3 centuries in the hilly fastnesses of the little traveled countryside has caused them to sink to a kind of barbaric degeneracy, rather than advance with their more fortunately placed brethren of thickly settled districts. Among these odd folk, who correspond exactly to the decadent element of white trash in the South, law and morals are non-existent, and their general mental status is probably below that of any other section of Native American people. Joe Slater, who came to the institution in the vigilant custody of 4 state policemen, and who was described as a highly dangerous character, certainly presented no evidence of his perilous disposition when I first beheld him. Though well above the middle stature, and of somewhat brawny frame, he was given an absurd appearance of harmless stupidity by the pale, sleepy blueness of his small, watery eyes, the scantness of his neglected and never-shaven growth of yellow beard, and the listless drooping of his heavy nether lip. His age was unknown, since among his kind neither family records nor permanent family ties exist. But from the baldness of his head in front, and from the decayed condition of his teeth, the head surgeon wrote him down as a man of about 40.
Hey, King Wicked, how you doing, bro?
Medical and court documents.
Thanks for stopping by.
Gathered of his case. This man, a vagabond, hunter, and trapper, had always been strange in the eyes of his primitive associates. He had habitually slept at night beyond the ordinary time, and upon waking would often talk of unknown things in a manner so bizarre as to inspire fear even in the hearts of an unimaginative populace. Not that his form of language was at all unusual, for he never spoke save in the debased patois of his environment, but the tone and tenor of his utterances were of such mysterious wildness that none might listen without apprehension. He himself was generally as terrified and baffled as his auditors, and within an hour after awakening would forget all that he had said, or at least all that had caused him to say what he did, relapsing into a bovine, half-amiable normality like that of the other hill dwellers. As Slater grew older, it appeared, his matutinal aberrations had gradually increased in frequency and violence. For about a month before his arrival at the institution had occurred the shocking tragedy which caused his arrest by the authorities.
Right, Stoney?
One day,
Any hair's better than none.
Profound sleep begun in a whiskey dipper at about 5 of the previous afternoon. The man had roused himself most suddenly, with ululations so horrible and unearthly that they brought several neighbors to his
Right now I'm smoking on some roaches.
style where he dwelt with a family as indescribable as himself. Rushing out into the snow, he had flung his arms aloft and commenced a series of leaps directly upward in the air, the while shouting his determination to reach some, quote, big cabin with brightness in the roof and walls and floor, and
Hey, the goddess, how you doing?
That sign sought to restrain him.
Thanks for
So
stopping
with
by.
maniacal force and fury, screaming of his desire and need to find and kill a certain, quote, thing that shines and shakes and laughs, unquote. At length, after temporarily felling one of his detainers with a sudden blow, he had flung himself upon the other in a demoniac ecstasy of bloodthirstiness, shrieking fiendishly that he would, quote, jump high in the air and burn his way through anything that stopped him, unquote. Family and neighbors had now fled in a panic, and when the more courageous of them
1 second, everyone.
leaving behind an unrecognizable cloak-like thing that had been a living man but an hour before. None of the mountaineers had dared to pursue him, and it is likely that they would have welcomed his death from the cold. But when several mornings later they heard his screams from a distant ravine, they realized that he had somehow managed to survive, and that his removal in one way or another would be necessary. Then had followed an armed searching party, whose purpose, whatever it may have been originally, became that of a sheriff's posse, after one of the seldom popular state troopers had by accident observed, then questioned, and finally joined the seekers. On the third day, Slater was found unconscious in the hollow of a tree and taken to the nearest jail, where alienists from Albany examined him as soon as his senses returned. To them he told a simple story. He had, he said, gone to sleep one afternoon about sundown after drinking much liquor. He had awakened to find himself standing bloody-handed in the snow before his cabin, the mangled corpse of his neighbor, Peter Slater, at his feet. Horrified, he had taken to the woods in a vague effort to escape from the scene of what must have been his crime. Beyond these things, he seemed to know nothing, nor could the expert questioning of his interrogators bring out a single additional fact. That night, Slater slept quietly, and the next morning he awakened with no singular feature save a certain alteration of its
I haven't been too bad, the goddess.
Barnard, who had been watching it patiently.
How you and the stick and everyone been doing?
Pale blue eyes, a certain gleam of peculiar quality, and in the placid lips an all but imperceptible tightening, as if of intelligent determination. But when questioned, Slater relapsed into the habitual vacancy of the mountaineer, and only reiterated what he had said on the preceding day. On the third morning occurred the first of the man's mental attacks. After some show of uneasiness in sleep, he burst forth into a frenzy so powerful that the combined efforts of 4 men were needed to bind him in a straitjacket.
Found you at the circus.
Listened with keen attention to his words. Since their curiosity
Were you dropped off at the circus, or did the circus drop you off somewhere?
mostly conflicting and incoherent stories of his family and neighbors.
Oh shit. Hell yeah, the goddess.
For upward of 15 minutes, babbling in his backwoods style.
It's always good to stay busy.
Light, oceans of space, strange music, and shadowy mountains and valleys. But most of all did he dwell upon some mysterious blazing entity that shook and laughed and mocked at him. This vast, vague personality seemed to have done him a terrible wrong, and to kill it in triumphant revenge was his paramount desire. In order to reach it, he said, he would soar through abysses of emptiness, burning every obstacle that stood in his way. Thus ran his discourse.
That's funny, Stoney.
Until with the greatest suddenness he ceased. The fire of madness died from his eyes, and in dull wonder he looked at his questioners and asked why he was bound. Then Barnard unbuckled the leather harness and did not restore it till night, and he succeeded in persuading Slater to don it of his own volition, for his own good. The man had now admitted that he sometimes talked queerly, though he knew not why. Within a week, 2 more attacks appeared, researchers learned little. On the source of Slater's visions, they speculated at length, for since he could neither read nor write, and had apparently never heard a legend or fairy tale, his gorgeous imagery was quite inexplicable. That it could not come from any known myth or romance was made especially clear by the fact that the unfortunate lunatic expressed only in his own simple manner. He raved of things he did not understand and could not interpret, things which he claimed to have experienced, but which he could not have any normal or connected narration. The alienist
the tattoos on my face and head.
Dreams whose vividness could for a time completely dominate
At spots they did, like where's it right here,
with due formality,
and then when it was around the eye,
on the ground of insanity, and committed
and
to
right here.
wherein I held so humble a post. I have said
And where is it? Yeah, this side of the head, because it goes all the way back like that.
with which I applied myself to the study of the new
That one was pretty gnarly.
as I fully ascertained the fact.
That was pretty intense. But
He seemed to sense a
the one right here,
or no doubt of the
I could have fell asleep through.
and the gentle manner in
Excuse
which I
me.
questioned him.
And the one on the head and
Ever recognized
this one were done by the same tattoo artist.
breathlessly upon his chaotic but cosmic word pictures. But he knew me in his quiet
The
hours
only one the spiders bite.
when he would sit by his barred window, weaving baskets.
And where is it? I got some more in this part too, but they weren't too bad.
Could never again enjoy. His family never called to see him. Probably it had found another temporary head, after the manner of decadent doctors.
No, wasn't that bad.
I commenced to feel an overwhelming wonder at the mad and fantastic.
Each one
The man himself
took about
inferior in mentality,
3, almost 4 hours.
but his glowing titanic visions, though described in a barbarous disjointed.
This one was, yeah, that one was a good minute too. Then I got most of it done, and it was about outline about half of the flag, and everything was colored in. And I had to come back after it healed to get it finished.
How could any backwoods dullard
'Cause yeah, that was pretty gnarly. That was definitely an experience.
Plato ranted in his furious delirium. More and more, I inclined to the belief that in the pitiful personality of things
My septum, yeah, it's at
something beyond
it's only a 10 gauge. It's not that big.
beyond the comprehension of
I went from a 14 gauge that they used to
scientific colleagues.
pierce it with, and I had already had it pierced for
Nothing definite from the man.
about a year,
The sum of all my
and I got it gauged up from a 14 gauge to a 10 gauge at once.
Plato wandered or floated.
That was something else. I've stretched my ears, and yeah, that hurts, but not that much. But gauging the septum, that's definitely intense there.
But there he was no peasant or degenerate, but a creature of
Oh, for my face and head, no, the most I did was smoke a blunt before, or a couple of bowls, and then waiting for my appointment.
And he did not appear to be of human shape, since Plato never referred to it as a man, or as aught.
From rooting on the fences.
This thing had done Slater some hideous but unnamed wrong, which the maniac, if maniac he were, yearned to avenge. From the manner in which Slater alluded to their dealings, I judged that he
Yeah, 'cause that picture that pops up, like when I comment something.
had in
What?
his dream existence, the man was himself a luminous thing, race as his enemy.
Throw that
This
up.
impression was sustained by his frequent references to
Like when I throw that up and my picture comes up, that picture is, I believe, this one. No, it's this one. And that's pretty much right after I got this one done.
If a dream world indeed existed,
That was the finished picture.
oral language was
or the finished product after I got it done.
Could it be that the dream soul
You want a girlfriend tattooed there in your tattoo? Hell yeah.
speak things which
Not me, because I was kind of laid down with my face like that.
could it be that I was face to face with intellectual emanations which would explain the mystery, if I could but learn to discover and read them?
Because when they're tattooing on the face, their side of the head, pretty much all you could hear and feel most of the time is the tattoo machine. But if they, I gotta admit though, if they have those newer ones now, they're just like, they're like fucking pens pretty much. Those ones are a lot less intense than the regular ones, because the other ones are big old coil guns, so those ones are gonna hurt a little bit.
This belief had early led me to contemplate the possibility of telepathy or mental communication by means of
Right, pretty much. Just that's like feel and hear is that vibration on the side of my head and face from the machine, and then all I hear is that sound the machine makes right there by the ear. And if they're moving it fast, that's all you can hear is it just going back and forth.
Now, in my intense desire to probe into the dream life of Joe Slater, I sought these instruments again.
Well, my face and head hurt, but what hurt the most is my ribs, because I got one from pretty much here down to my waist. It's just the outline. I still gotta get it finished, but the ribs is that's something else. That's pretty intense. And then I got one directly on the center of my chest that was pretty gnarly. But yeah, most of what I got left is all the painful spots. Armpit. Yeah, I heard. I don't know. I've heard mixed things on that, because there's a buddy of ours from where me and my brother used to live. My brother actually tattooed this guy's armpit, some tribal work, and yeah, that was pretty intense on that dude. But I've seen like from when I worked in a tattoo shop, I've seen chicks get their tattoo or their armpits done and not even flinch. I've seen there's like 18, 19-year-old kids come into the shop, first tattoo, and they get this big ass piece on their ribs, and they just lay there fucking around on their phone like it's nothing.
Perhaps it was his mountain freedom that he missed, or perhaps the turmoil in his brain had grown too acute for his rather sluggish physique. But, at all events, the flame of vitality flickered low in the decadent body. He was drowsy near the end, and as darkness fell, he dropped off into a troubled sleep.
Well,
I did not strap on the
that's all tattooed.
when he slept, since I saw that he was too feeble to be dangerous, even if he woke in mental disorder.
That elbow, that shit fucking hurt.
But I did place upon his head and mind the two ends of my cosmic radio, hoping against
But all that,
and last message from the dream world.
that's
Brief time remaining.
probably like 8, 9 sessions, I would think.
A mediocre
And it was like about 2 hours a session.
Or think to inquire into my course.
Yeah, I heard that the feet are. I've seen too. The feet are pretty gnarly. I've seen the way people react when they're getting their feet done. And from what I heard too, that the top of the foot is that's definitely a real tender spot to get tattooed.
The sound of weird lyric melody was what aroused me. Chords, vibrations, and harmonic ecstasies echoed passionately on every hand, while on my ravished sight burst the stupendous spectacle of ultimate beauty. Walls, columns, and architraves of living fire blazed effulgently around the spot where I seemed to float in the air. ascending upward to an infinitely high vaulted dome of indescribable splendor.
You just came in.
Blending with
Come
its
here.
display of palatial magnificence, or rather, supplanting it at times in kaleidoscopic rotation.
Over here.
Glimpses of wide plains and graceful valleys, high mountains, and inviting grottos, covered with every lovely attribute of scenery which my delighted eyes could conceive of, yet formed wholly of some glowing, ethereal, fantasy,
What is it, buddy?
and a consistency partook as much of spirit as of matter. As I gazed, I perceived that my own brain held the key to these enchanting metamorphoses. For each vista which appeared to me was the one
Yeah, I need more tattoos too.
I most wished to behold.
This is Damien.
Amidst this Elysian realm, I dwelt not as a stranger, for each sight and sound was familiar to me, just as it had been for uncounted eons of eternity before, and would be for like eternities to come. Then the resplendent aura of my brother of light drew near and held colloquy with me, soul to soul, with silent and perfect interchange of thought. The hour was one of approaching triumph, for was not my fellow being escaping at last from a grating periodic bondage, escaping forever,
Go there.
and preparing to follow the accursed oppressor, even unto the uttermost fields of ether, that upon it might be wrought a flaming cosmic vengeance, which would shake the spheres. We floated thus for a little time.
Oh yeah, I know who's faking it. That's my brother's dog.
As though some force were recalling me to earth, where I least wished to go. The form near me seemed to feel a change also.
Cats are assholes.
Disposed toward a conclusion, and itself prepared to quit the scene, fading from my sight at a rate somewhat less rapid than that of the other object.
You just came in. No, go away.
A few more thoughts were exchanged, and I knew that the luminous one and I were being held in bondage.
You got a cat. You can confirm it.
Like it would be the last time.
What the fuck was that?
The sorry planet shell being well nigh spent. In less than
Give me 1 second, everyone.
To pursue the oppressor along the Milky Way, and past the thither stars to the very confines of infinity. A well-defined shock separates my final impression of the fading scene of light from my sudden and somewhat shamefaced awakening, and straightening up in my chair, as I saw the dying figure on the couch move hesitantly. Joe Slater was indeed awakening, though probably for the last time. As I looked more closely, I saw that in the sallow cheeks shone spots of color which had never before been present. The lips, too, seemed unusual, being tightly compressed, as if by the force of a stronger character than had been Slater's. The whole face finally began to grow tense, and the head turned restlessly with closed eyes. I did not rouse the sleeping nurse, but readjusted the slightly disarranged headband of my telepathic radio, intent to catch any parting message the dreamer might have to deliver. All at once, the head turned sharply in my direction, and the eyes fell open, causing me to stare in blank amazement at what I beheld. The man who had been Joe Slater, the Catskill decadent, was gazing at me with a pair of luminous, expanding eyes whose blue seemed puzzling to a people. Neither mania nor degeneracy was visible in that gaze, and I felt beyond a doubt that I was...
Yeah, King Wicked, my brother got his laptop. He's at work right now. He won't get off till about around 2, after 2. Yeah, he's been messing around with the outfits yesterday and today. Well, as you can see, outfits. He's been working on just one outfit. Once in a while, yeah, Stoney, when she comes by, Because we dog shit for her when she's at work.
Clinker is dead, came the soul petrifying voice of an
She's doing good, Stony.
My opened eyes sought the couch of pain and curious
She
horror,
was here earlier.
but the blue eyes were still calmly gazing, and the countenance was still intelligently animated. He is better dead, for he was unfit to bear the active intellect of cosmic entity. His gross body could not undergo the needed adjustments between ethereal life and planet life. He was too much an animal, too little a man. Yet it is through his deficiency that you have come to discover me. For the cosmic and planet souls rightly should never meet. He has been in my torment and diurnal prison for 42 of your terrestrial years. I am an entity like that which you yourself become in the freedom of dreamless sleep. I am your brother of
Busting her lung. I try to.
It is not permitted me to tell your waking earth self.
Dabs hurt the lungs more than anything else nowadays.
We are all roamers of vast spaces and travelers in many ages. Next year I may be dwelling in the Egypt which you call ancient, or in the cruel empire of San Shan, which is to come 3,000 years hence.
So full was I of slumber at the moment in which I had abandoned the true way. But after I had reached a mountain's foot, at that point where the valley terminated. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recorded by Corey Samuel. The Divine Comedy by Dante Alighieri. Translated by Henry.
Hi, yeah, goddess. Thanks for stopping by. And if I don't catch you live before, happy early birthday.
Upon the journey of our life, I found myself within a forest dark, but the straightforward pathway had been lost.
Yeah, I forgot how long it takes from seed to harvest. Because this is the first run in a while that me and my brothers done from seed on.
Death is little more, but of the good tree, which there I found.
Because there for a while we had a friend of ours that was constantly bringing us clones, and when he brought us clones, it was usually like 3 or 4 clones each. So pretty much once we were done with one, he was bringing more for us. So we hadn't had a chance to run any of the genetics that we had because of that. So now we told him like to chill this run on the clones because we wanted to grow some of our own genetics.
Forth issued from the sea upon the shore, turns to the water perilous and gazes. So did my soul. My soul was fleeing onward, turned itself back to re-behold the past, which never yet.
Right, Stony.
After my weary body I had rested. The way was
but thankfully, all the clones we got from him
so that the firm foot
was good genetics. Because that's all he ever gets is all his stuff is straight feminized. He has a pretty healthy collection of genetics he actually orders and he gets from different companies and whatnot.
The time was the beginning of the morning.
Oh, damn.
The sun was mounting with their stars.
That's
in love,
insane, Stony.
time the love divine. At first in motion set those beauteous things. So were to me occasion of good hope, the variegated skin of that wild beast, the hour and the delicious season, but not so much a lion's aspect which appeared to me. He seemed as if against me he were coming, with head uplifted, and with ravenous hunger, so that it seemed the air was afraid of him. And a she-wolf, that with all hungerings seemed to be laden in her meagreness, and many folk has caused to live forlorn. She brought upon me so much heaviness, with the affright that from her aspect came, that I
Oh
was
shit.
relinquished of the height. And as he is who willingly applies,
That's a trip you had that long. That'd be insane to see how once you flower it out, how it comes out.
and is despondent. E'en such made me that beast.
Oh, got pollinate in. Hope for the best.
Coming on against me by degrees, thrust me
Damn.
back thither where the sun is silent. While I was rushing downward to the lowland, before mine eyes did one present himself, who seemed from long continued silence hoarse. When I beheld him in the desert vast, have pity on me, unto him I cried, whiche'er thou art, or shade, or real man. He answered me, not man, man once I was, and both my parents were of Lombardy, and Manchurians by country both of them. Sub Julio was I born, though it was late, and lived at Rome
That's
under
funny,
good
Stony.
Augustus, during the time of fox
Doesn't
and
accept
lion
pollen, huh?
A poet was I, and I sang that just, son of Anchises,
Super
who came
lesbian
forth from
haze.
Troy. After that, Ilion was heard
That's
and
funny.
known. But thou, why'st go thou back to such annoyance? Why climb'st thou not the Mount Delectable, which is the source and cause of every joy? Now, art thou that Virgilus, and that fountain which spreads abroad so wide a river of speech? I made response to him, with bashful forehead. Oh, of the other poets, honour and light, avail me the long study and great love that have impelled me to explore thy volume. Thou art my master, and my author thou. Thou art alone the one from whom I took the beautiful style that has done honour to me. Behold the beast, for which I have turned back. Do thou protect me from her, famous sage, for she doth make my veins and pulses tremble. Thee it behooves to take another road, responded he, when he beheld me weeping. If from this savage place thou wouldst escape, because this beast, at which thou criest out, suffers not any one to pass her way, but so doth harass him that she destroys him, and has a nature so malign and ruthless, that never doth she glut her greedy will, and after food is hungrier than before.
Give me 1 second, everyone. Be right back.
And more they shall be still, until the greyhound comes, who shall make her perish in her pain. Ye shall not feed on either earth or pelf, but upon wisdom, and on love and virtue. Twixt Feltro and Feltro shall his nation be. Of that low Italy shall he be the saviour, on whose account the maid Camilla died. Euryalus, Turnus, Nisus of their wounds. Through every city shall he hunt her down, till he shall have driven her back to hell, there from whence envy first did let her loose. Therefore I think, and judge it for thy best, thou follow me, and I will be thy guide, and lead thee hence through the eternal place, where thou shalt hear the desperate lamentations, shall see the ancient spirits disconsolate, who cry out each one the second dead. And thou shalt see those who contented are within the fire, because they hope to come, whene'er it may be, to the blessed people. To whom, then, if thou wishest to ascend, a soul shall be for that, the nigh more worthy. With her at my departure I will leave thee, because that that emperor who reigns above, in that I was rebellious to his law, wills that through me none come into his city. He governs everywhere, and there he reigns. There is his city and his lofty throne. Oh, happy he whom thereto he elects. And I to him, Poet, I thee entreat, by that same God whom thou didst never know, that I may escape this woe and worse. Thou wouldst conduct me there, where thou hast said, that I may see the portal of St. Peter, and those thou makest so disconsolate. Then he moved on, and I behind him followed. End of Canto 1. Inferno, Canto 2. Day was departing, and the embrowned air released the animals that are on earth from their fatigues, and I, the only one, made myself ready to sustain the war, both of the way, and likewise of the woe, which memory that errs not shall retrace.
A harvest for more in 10 days. Oh shit.
Genius, now
Oh,
assist me. O
Yeah.
memory,
A lot better than what I'm doing.
Here thy
Stony.
nobility shall be manifest. And I
It's what I'm down to right now.
Poet, who guidest me, regard my manhood, if it be sufficient, ere to the arduous pass thou dost confide me. Thou sayest that of Silvius the parent, while yet corruptible, unto the world immortal went, and was there bodily. But if the adversary of all evil was courteous, thinking of the high effect that issue would from him, and who, and what, to men
Hell yeah, Stony.
it seems not. For he was of great Rome, and of her
Oh yeah, I smoke. I love bud still, but I love dabbing too.
Wishing to speak the truth, was established as the holy place, wherein sits the successor of the greatest Peter. Upon this journey, whence thou givest him vaunt, things did he hear, which the occasion were.
Because this is what I've been using to take my dabs off of.
Thither went afterwards the chosen vessel, to bring back comfort thence unto that faith, which of salvation's way is the beginning. But
It's a Carta Focus V. Definitely
I'm not Paul.
Definitely gives a pretty good smooth hit.
Therefore, if I resign myself to come, I fear the coming may be ill advised. Thou art
Little
wise,
carb cap.
and knowest better than I speak. And as he is, who unwills what he will, and by new thoughts doth his intention change.
I definitely I go through my dabs a lot quicker with that, because that's pretty much this easy.
I consumed the emprise, which was so very confident.
It's turned on.
If I have well thy language understood, replied that shade of the magnanimous, thy soul attainted is.
Once it turns green, it's ready to go.
Which many times a man encumbers so.
Just turn that off.
Turns him back from honoured enterprise.
But
as false sight doth
that easy.
Shine. That thou mayest free thee from this apprehension, I'll tell thee why I came, and what I heard at the first moment when I grieved for thee. Among those was I who are in suspense.
I got my regular dab rig too back here.
Her eyes were shining brighter than the star, and she began to say, gentle and low, with voice angelical, in her own language.
It is a little dirty.
Courteous Mantua, of whom you fame still in the world endures, and shining joy, long-lasting as the world. A friend of mine, and not the friend of fortune, upon the desert slope is so impeded upon his way, that he is turned through terror, and may, I fear, already be so lost, that I too late have risen to his succour. From that which I have heard of him in heaven, stir thee now, and with thy speech ornate, and with thy movements for his release, assist him so, that I may be consoled. Let who bid thee go, come from there, where I would fain return. Love moved me, which compelleth me to speak. When I shall be in presence of my Lord.
No, unfortunately, I don't got a press.
Then paused she, and thereafter I began. O Lady of Virtue,
It has not too much walk space, end up tripping.
race exceedeth all, contained within the heaven that has the lesser circles. So grateful unto me is thy commandment, to obey if 'twere already done or late. No farther needst thou ope to me thy wish. But the cause,
Bang
tell
it
me
too
why
hard.
thou dost not shun, for here descending down into the centre, from the vast place thou burnest to return to.
I've luckily, knock on wood, haven't broke any of my bangers. The rigs, on the other hand, I've broken a couple of those, but the bangers that I still have, yeah, almost place plant. Well, luckily, if I would have went forward, my bed's right there, so I would have landed on my bed.
Nor any flame assails me at this burning. A gentle lady is in heaven, who grieves at this impediment to which I send thee. So that stern judgment there above is broken.
But most of my bangers are all
She besought me,
quartz bangers, so they're pretty durable.
thy faithful one now stands in need of thee, and unto thee I recommend him. Lucia, foe of all that full is, hastened away, and came unto the place where I was sitting with the ancient Rachel. Beatrice, said she, the true praise of God. Why succourest thou not him who loved thee so? For thee he issued from the vulgar herd.
Oh, damn, that sucks, Stoney.
Hear the pity of his plaint. Dost thou not see the death that combats him, beside that flood where ocean...
Yeah, pretty much.
Never were persons in the world so swift to work their will and to escape their woe, as I, after such words as these were uttered, came hither downward from my blessed seat, confiding in thy dignified discourse, which honours thee, and those who listen to it. After she thus had spoken unto me, weeping her shining eyes she turned away, whereby she made me swifter in my coming. And unto thee I came, as she desired. I have delivered thee from that wild beast, which barred the beautiful mountain's short ascent. What is it then? Why dost thou delay? Why is such baseness bedded in thy heart? Daring and hardihood, why hast thou not? Seeing that 3 such ladies benedight are caring for thee in the court of heaven, and so much good my speech doth promise thee, even as the flowerets, by nocturnal chill, bowed down and closed, when the sun whitens them, uplift themselves all open on their stems. Such I became with my exhausted strength, and such good courage to my heart there coursed, that I began, like an intrepid person. Oh, she compassionate who succoured me, and courteous thou, who hast obeyed so soon the words of truth which she addressed to thee. Thou hast my heart so with desire disposed to the adventure with these words of thine, that to my first intent I have returned. Now go, for one sole will is in us both, thou leader, and thou Lord, and Master thou. Thus said I to him, and when he had moved, I entered on the deep and savage way. End of Canto 2. Inferno, Canto 3.
LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, visit LibriVox.org. Reading by Mark Nelson. The Dunwich Horror, Part 1. Gorgons and Hydras and Chimeras, dire stories of Savino and the Harpies, may reproduce themselves in the brain of superstition, but they were there before. They are transcripts, types. The archetypes are in us and eternal. How else should the recital of that which we know in a waking sense to be false come to affect us at all? Is it that we naturally conceive terror from such objects, considered in their capacity of being able to inflict upon us bodily injury? Oh, least of all. These terrors are of older standing. They date beyond.
I agree, Stoney.
Without the body,
The world's only tolerable because
but the kind of fear here treated
I'm well
is purely
medicated.
spiritual, that it is strong in proportion as it is objectless.
Because if not, it'd be a very, very bad place for a lot of people.
Infancy, are difficulties the solution of which might afford some probable insight into our anti-mundane condition, and a peep at least into the shadowland of pre-existence.
Not me, I again, just stone, and if I don't have any work to do some gaming.
When a traveler in north-central Massachusetts takes the wrong fork at the junction of the Aylesbury Pike just beyond Dean's Corners, he comes upon a lonely and curious country. The ground gets higher, and the briar-bordered stone walls press closer and closer against the ruts of the dusty, curving road. The trees of the frequent forest belt seem too large, and the wild weeds, brambles, and grasses attain a luxuriance not often found in settled regions. At the same time, the planted fields appear singularly few and barren, while the sparsely scattered houses wear a surprising uniform aspect of age, squalor, and dilapidation. Without knowing why, one hesitates to ask directions from the gnarled, solitary figures spied now and then on crumbling doorsteps or in the sloping, rock-strewn meadows. Those figures are so silent and furtive that one feels somehow confronted by forbidden things, with which it would be better to have nothing to do. When a rise in the road brings the mountains in view above the deep woods, the feeling of strange uneasiness is increased. The summits are too rounded
Oh shit.
to give a sense
I don't know. I know they like doing that.
And sometimes the sky silhouettes with especial clearness the queer circles of tall stone pillars with which most of them are crowned. Gorges and ravines of problematical depth intersect the way, and the crude wooden bridges always seem of dubious safety.
And I'm always having to re-hit people back up and re-ring bells because YouTube takes it away for some reason.
To dance to the raucous, creepily insistent rhythms of stridently piping bullfrogs. The thin, shining line of the Miskatonic's upper reaches has an oddly serpent-like suggestion as it winds close to the feet of the domed hills among which it rises. As the hills draw near, one heaves the wooded in their stone so and precipitously that one wishes they would keep their distance. There is no road by which to escape them. Across a covered bridge, one sees a
yeah, trimming sucks, but it sucks, but at least when you're done, you're that much closer to being able to smoke it. Me and my brother, that's how we do our trimming, is pretty much straight off the plant. As soon as it's time for harvest, we'll chop the plant down and start trimming.
One dreads to cross the tenebrous tunnel of the bridge, yet there is no way to avoid it. Once across, it is hard to prevent the impression of a faint, malign odor about the village street, as of the massed mold and decay of centuries. It is always a relief to get clear of the place, and to follow the narrow road around the base of the hills and across the level country beyond till it rejoins the Aylesbury Pike. Afterward, one sometimes learns that one has been through Dunwich. Outsiders visit Dunwich as seldom as possible, and since a certain season of horror, all the signboards pointing toward it have been taken down. The scenery, judged by any ordinary aesthetic canon, is more than commonly beautiful. Yet there is no influx of artists or summer tourists. 2 centuries ago, when talk of witch blood, Satan worship, and strange forest presences was not laughed at, it was the custom to give reasons for avoiding the locality. In our sensible age, since the Dunwich horror of 1928 was hushed up by those who had the town's and the world's welfare at heart, people shun it without knowing exactly why. Perhaps one reason, though it cannot apply to uninformed strangers, is that the natives are now repellently decadent.
No shit, that's
having
pretty.
gone far
That's
along
pretty
the path
high.
of retrogression so common in many New England backwaters. They have come to form a race by themselves, with the well-defined mental and physical stigmata of degeneracy and inbreeding. The average of their intelligence is woefully low, whilst their annals reek of overt viciousness and of half-hidden murders, incests, and deeds of almost unnameable violence and perversity. The old gentry, representing the 2 or 3 Armiger's families which came from Salem in 1692, have kept somewhat above the general level of decay, though many branches are sunk into the sordid populace so deeply that only their names remain as a key to the origin they disgrace. Some of the Whateleys and Bishops still send their eldest sons to Harvard and Miskatonic.
That's insane. It's that high humidity at night.
To the moldering gambrel roofs under which they and their ancestors were born.
I don't know how I feel about that.
No one,
That would suck.
even those who have the facts concerning the recent horror, can say just what is the matter with
If there's a term too high, that's it.
Old legends speak of unhallowed rites and conclaves of the Indians, amidst which they called forbidden shapes of shadow out of the great rounded hills, and made wild orgiastic prayers that were answered by loud crackings and rumblings from the ground below.
Hey, Panda Cat.
1747, the Reverend Abijah Hoadley, newly come to the Congregational Church at Dunwich Village, preached a memorable sermon on the close presence of Satan and his imps, in which he said, "It must be allowed that these blasphemies of an infernal train of demons are matters of too common knowledge to be denied. The cursed voices of Azazel and Buzrael, of Beelzebub and Belial, being heard from underground by above, a score of credible witnesses now living. I myself did not more than a fortnight ago catch a very plain discourse of evil powers in the hill behind my house, wherein there were a rattling and rolling, groaning, screeching, and hissing, such as no things of this earth could raise up, and which must needs have come from those caves that only black magic can discover, and only the devil unlock." Mr. Hoadley disappeared soon after delivering this sermon, but the text, printed in Springfield, is still extant. Noises in the hills continue to be reported from year to year, and still form a puzzle to geologists and physiographers. Other traditions tell of foul odors near the hill-crowning circles of stone pillars, and of rushing airy presences to be heard faintly at certain hours from stated points at the bottom of the great ravines, whilst
No shit, Stony. Hey, Fieldhouse, how you doing? Thanks for stopping by. How you been doing, Fieldhouse? Here, chopping shit. Alright, everyone, I'm going to call into this live for right now. Thanks, everyone, for stopping by. And everyone who keeps coming back by. Hope everyone has a good night. Stay safe out there. Till next time, I hope we'll scum out.